Good evening, and welcome to Tuck and Tales. Take a deep breath, get cozy under the blankets, and settle in for tonight's story. Let the world grow quiet, and let the night carry you gently into rest. These are the stories that tuck you in. Tonight, we journey to the edge of the sea, where the wind moves softly through the grass, where the waves speak in low voices to the stones, and where a single light turns patiently through the dark. This is the story of the lighthouse keeper who guided lost souls, long before the oldest fishermen of the coast had grown old, and long before children learned to point from the shore and name the white tower in the distance. There was only a lonely island of black stone rising from the Aegean Sea. It was a small island, little more than a weathered cliff with rough grass at its crown, and salt water forever breathing against its base. No trees grew there, no village stood there, no bell rang there. Only wind, rock, sea, and the patient moon. And yet, even before the lighthouse was built, sailors felt something unusual when they passed that place in the night. They would lower their voices without knowing why. They would glance toward the dark cliff and feel, for just a moment, that they were not entirely alone upon the water. Some said the island listened, some said it remembered, others said that old places, if left untouched long enough, begin to wait for the thing they were made to become. If that was true, then the island had been waiting for her. Her name among mortals was Nerina. Among the people of the nearby coast, she was known simply as the Keeper. But long before she became the Keeper of the Light, she had belonged to another kingdom entirely. For Nerina was not born under rain or sunlight. She was not born in any house built by men. She was born in the deep halls of the Sea King, far beneath the shifting skin of the world, below the green fading light of the surface, below the places where fish turned silver and vanished into shadow. There stood a vast kingdom of coral towers and shell-lit chambers. Its roads were white with pearl. Its gardens were forests of swaying kelp and drifting flowers of the tide. Its windows opened onto dark water older than memory, and there, in a hall supported by pillars shaped from black coral and moon-pale stone, the Sea King ruled with ancient patience. He ruled the tides. He ruled the winter currents. He ruled the storms that shook ships in the night, and the long quiet swells that lifted sleeping harbors before dawn. Nothing in his kingdom moved beyond his knowledge. Nothing rose or sank without passing, in some way, through his awareness. And yet, for all his power, there was one thing he could never fully command. He could not command the heart of his daughter. Nerina was beloved in her father's halls. She was graceful, quiet, and given to long silences that others mistook for serenity. But beneath that serenity lived something stronger than rest, curiosity, tenderness, and a longing that rose always upward. While the others of the sea court delighted in the endless beauty of the deep, Nerina was drawn to the world above. Not because it was grander, it was not. Not because it was more powerful, it was not that either. She loved it because it was fragile. She loved the flicker of oil lamps in cottage windows. She loved the sight of small boats crossing wide water under uncertain skies. She loved the songs that fishermen sang while mending their nets. She loved the courage of mothers who lit lanterns for sons not yet home. She loved the way mortals built warmth against darkness with nothing but hands and hope. Again and again she rose towards the surface, at first in secret, then less secretly. She would linger beneath harbour waters and listen to voices carry over the docks. She would float below the moon and watch village lights tremble on the sea. She would hear old men telling stories beside shore fires. She would watch tired fishermen row home through mist, guided only by memory, instinct, and some small lamp burning at the edge of land. The more she saw of mortals, the more deeply she loved them, not because they were mighty, not because they were wise, but because they continued. They loved though loss waited for them. They sailed though storms existed. They built homes though time would wear those homes away. Among the immortals, endurance was effortless. Among mortals, endurance was beautiful. The Sea King saw this change in her long before she spoke of it. He noticed how often she looked upward when the currents shifted. He noticed how her thoughts wandered during court songs. He noticed that whenever she returned from the surface, she brought back a strange silence with her, as if some portion of her spirit remained listening to a distant shore. At last, he called her before him. The hall was quiet that day. Blue light drifted softly across the floor of pearl. The long curtains of sea silk moved in the current like sleeping tides. Narina came and stood before her father's dark throne. He regarded her for some time before speaking. "My daughter," he said, "your heart has been rising where your feet cannot remain." Narina did not pretend otherwise. She had always been gentle, but she had never been false. "I have been listening to the upper world," she said. The Sea King's gaze deepened. "And what do you hear there that you do not hear here?" Narina lifted her eyes. "I hear longing," she said. "I hear courage. I hear the small ways in which mortals keep one another from despair." The court murmured at this, for immortals often admire mortals from a safe distance, but they do not always understand loving them closely. The Sea King raised one hand, and the murmurs fell away. "The upper world is brief," he said. "It is wounded by weather. It is wounded by time. It is made of farewells." "That is why I cannot turn away from it," Narina answered. The Sea King descended from his throne and came to stand before her. "You love what breaks," he said. Narina shook her head softly. "No, father. I love what still gives warmth after breaking." That answer stayed in the hall a long while, for even the old currents seemed to pause and listen. The Sea King was not an unloving father. He was ancient and strong, and burdened with the kind of power that makes tenderness difficult to show. But he loved her deeply, and because he loved her, he feared for her. "If you go above," he said, "grief will touch you. Age will touch those you love. Storms will not spare you because you were born beneath the waves. The mortal world does not ask gently, it takes." Narina listened, and the sadness in her face was not disagreement but understanding. "I know," she said. "Then why do you still wish to go?" Narina turned her gaze upward, though there was no sky above them. "Because so many stand near darkness with only a small light between them and fear," she said. "Because so many are lost not only at sea, but in sorrow. Because if I remain here in beauty while they struggle there in storm, then what is the worth of my peace?" The Sea King said nothing for a time. He looked past her through the crystal walls of the hall into the black vastness of his own dominion. He had ruled the sea for ages. He had commanded hurricanes and calmed tides. He had watched empires rise and vanish along the shore. And yet he knew more clearly than anyone in that hall, that some choices cannot be prevented by force. They can only be met with blessing or regret. At last he spoke again. "If you go," he said, "you may not return for many years." Narina bowed her head. "Then I will carry this sea with me," she said. A shadow passed through her father's eyes. Then, from beside his throne, he lifted something long kept and rarely touched. It was a lantern of old brass and curved sea glass, simple in shape but filled with a quiet glow that seemed warmer than ordinary flame. He placed it in her hands. "Wherever you lift this in kindness," he told her, "the lost shall see what they most need to see. Not illusion, not deceit, but the truest road available to them." Narina accepted the lantern with both hands. For the first time, the court understood that she was truly leaving. She stepped closer to her father. He placed one hand upon her brow. "Go then, daughter of the deep," he said, "but remember this. A light kept for others must also be guarded from sorrow." Narina wanted to promise him she would never be overcome, but she was too wise for false promises. Instead, she said only this: "I will tend it carefully." That night she rose from the deep. The moon had laid a silver path over the water. The surface parted around her without sound. And when her feet touched the black stone of the island, she felt something rare and immediate. Recognition. As if the island itself had been waiting. As if the wind had known her before she arrived. As if the sea had carried her not to a destination, but to an answer. At first there was no tower, only a patch of dry stone above the tide, a ring of rocks for a fire, the lantern, the wind, the stars, and the long breathing dark of the sea. Narina built a small shelter of driftwood sailcloth and remained there through the first nights. Fishermen on the mainland saw the glow of her fire and began to speak of the solitary woman on the island. Some thought she was a widow, some thought a hermit, some thought perhaps a priestess from a forgotten temple. But when the weather turned rough and boats began returning safely after following the small steady glow from her fire, curiosity slowly softened into trust. They brought her gifts: bread still warm from village ovens, a water jar, a kettle, rope, a stool with one leg shorter than the others, wool blankets. She accepted everything with gratitude so quiet and sincere that those who brought such things often rode away feeling oddly comforted. In time, she helped them in return. She mended torn nets. She warned them on certain days not to sail too far west. She showed them how to tie a stronger knot for winter weather. And though she rarely explained how she knew these things, they learned to listen. If the keeper said wait for dawn, they waited. If she said tonight the channel will turn unkind, they stayed close to shore. Because those who listened came back. And on the sea, that is proof enough. The idea of the lighthouse grew slowly. No lord ordered it. No tax collected it. No herald announced it. It was built because enough people, after enough nights, came to believe that the island needed a tower and that the woman upon it had already become its heart. So they brought stone, they brought lime, they brought timber blackened with salt. They rode through dawn mist carrying loads too heavy for narrow boats. They climbed the island path with tools and aching backs, and Narina labored beside them. She carried stone on her shoulder. She tied ropes with sea-roughened hands. She stirred soup over the fire for tired men at dusk. She climbed half-built scaffolds in cold wind and never once spoke as though the work were beneath her. There was no trace of royalty in her then, only steadiness, only service, only purpose. By night, when the builders had gone home, and the unfinished tower rose pale in moonlight, she would sit alone by the fire and listen to the sea. Sometimes she heard only waves, sometimes the cry of distant gulls, sometimes the rustle of coarse grass bending under salt wind. But sometimes she heard other things, the sound of an oar where no boat could be seen, a name called softly from somewhere beyond the western rocks, a fragment of song that ended too soon. At first she thought these were echoes, then she understood. Not all who are lost vanish quickly. The sea keeps many things: broken masts, silver rings, forgotten promises, and now and then souls who have missed the road onward, not cursed, not wicked, simply uncertain, caught between fear and home. So Narina began to speak into the dark, not with commands, not with magic spoken loudly, with stories. She spoke of warm bread set upon a table. She spoke of olive trees turning silver under morning wind. She spoke of doors opening, of lamps lit in windows, of shorelines at dawn, of mothers who had finally ceased waiting, because in dreams they had seen those they loved arrive safely somewhere beyond grief. That as she spoke, the night often grew still, and in that stillness shapes would gather at the edge of perception. A sailor with water-dark hair, a child no older than 10, holding a piece of splintered mast, an old woman in clothes from a century already gone. They did not rush toward her, they only listened. And when they were ready, Narina lifted her father's lantern and walked toward the western side of the island, where the sea below the cliff became strangely calm. There the world thinned, not into a gate, not into a shining road, only into a piece deeper than dark water. One by one, the uncertain would follow the warm glow of her lantern to that edge, and then go onward. Thus, even before the lighthouse was complete, the island had already begun its true work. At last, the tower was finished. It was simple, white stone, a narrow stair, a chamber for the great lamp, a strong door against winter winds, nothing more, and that was enough. On the evening of its first lighting, the people of the coast gathered quietly on the mainland shore. No musicians played, no garlands were hung, no speeches were made. The sea itself seemed too solemn for celebration. They simply watched. Far across the darkening water, Narina climbed the stairs alone. A few moments later, the lantern room glowed. Then the great lens caught the flame, and then, with a slowness so patient it felt almost holy, the beam opened over the sea. It passed once over the black water, then again, then again. A golden road turning over darkness. No one cheered, no one moved. One fisherman removed his cap and held it against his chest. A woman standing beside him began to cry softly and could not have said why. A child squeezed his mother's hand and whispered that the sea looked less deep now. From that night onward, the coast changed. Ships still faced weather. Storms still came. Fog still rolled in from nowhere. Yet under that turning light, sailors found courage. Mothers slept more deeply. Widows looked out from their windows and felt less abandoned by the horizon. It was as if the beam itself said what none could say aloud often enough. You are not alone in the dark. Narina settled into her life of watchfulness. At dusk, she climbed the tower and tended the great lamp. By night, she sat below near the campfire, her cloak around her shoulders, the brass lantern beside her. The rotating beam swept the sea above. The smaller fire breathed among the stones below. The grass swayed, the waves moved, the stars deepened, and those who needed her slowly found her. Among the living too, one soul returned more often than the rest. His name was Thomas. When he was a boy, he had carried stones for the tower. When he was a young man, he rowed oil across the channel. When he grew older, he became keeper of the quay on the mainland and knew the moods of weather better than many who claimed to know the sea. Thomas was not extraordinary to look at. He was broad-shouldered and sun-browned. His hands were rough. His beard grew unevenly in winter. He spoke little, but he noticed things. He noticed when storms came with silence before them. He noticed when widows smiled only because others expected it. He noticed that Nerina, though calm, had the loneliness of one who carries much for others and asks little for herself. At first, he visited only to deliver oil and supplies. Then he lingered by the fire. Then he remained after the work was done, simply because the evening had not yet ended, and neither, it seemed, had the conversation. They spoke of weather, of boats, of cloud shapes above open water, of the stubbornness of seabirds, of small happenings in the village, a child born, a wall repaired, a fig tree finally yielding fruit after years of stubborn refusal. Nerina listened to such things as though they were treasures, and Thomas understood something then that others only sensed. She loved mortal life not in great events, but in small continuities. She loved the ordinary because the ordinary is what people lose first when sorrow enters. So affection grew between them, not quickly, not brightly, not with the sort of fire young poets mistake for forever. This was quieter, a love of repeated evenings, shared bread, long silences that did not ask to be filled. The knowledge that one person would return tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Of all the forms of love, this one is the gentlest, and often the deepest. Years passed. The lighthouse weathered, its door darkened with salt. Its stone took on the softness that all long-used places eventually gather. Children grew into sailors. Sailors grew into old men who pointed toward the island and said that in their father's time the light had already been faithful. Nerina remained unchanged. Thomas did not. At first it was small, a pause before lifting a crate, a little stiffness after rowing in cold weather, a touch of grey at the temple, then more, a deeper line beside the mouth, a hand that shook slightly in winter wind. An island path climbed more slowly than before. Nerina saw each of these changes. She said little of them, but there are griefs that begin long before farewell. This was one. One evening, while the great beam moved steadily over the dark water and the campfire sent smoke softly into the blue night, Thomas said, "They tell stories of you now in every house along the coast." "Do they?" Nerina asked. He nodded. "Some say you are a saint. Some say you are a daughter of the sea. Some say that if your light ever failed, the shore itself would grow lonelier." Nerina watched a spark rise and vanish. "And what do you say, Thomas?" He looked at the lighthouse for a while before answering. "I say you have spent many years guiding others home, and I think perhaps too few have wondered who guides you." For a long moment, the only answer was the sea. Then Nerina said quietly, "Some kinds of work keep a person standing between worlds." Thomas smiled. "Then the worlds should be grateful," he said, "for the one who stands there." It was on a winter night that the sea demanded its great turning. The day had been cold and strangely still. The gulls had flown low. The horizon had worn the heavy look of weather not yet arrived. Narina felt unrest below the channel long before the first true wind came. Something old was gathering beneath the waves. Not rage, not exactly. Something sadder. Longing. The storm struck after midnight. Rain bent across the cliffs in silver slants. The sea rose black and white. The tower trembled under the force of the wind. Far out beyond the western reef, a ship sounded its horn. Lost. Too close to the rocks. Narina set the great lamp burning brighter than ever before. Thomas had rowed to the island before nightfall with extra oil, and now he remained. Together they climbed the stairs, fed the flame, checked the turning gear, secured the lower door. Outside, the storm lashed the tower, and the little campfire bent low among the stones but did not go out. Then Narina heard something beneath the storm. Voices, not from the living ship alone, from the water, from the current itself. Old souls, unguided souls. Generations of the sea's unfinished sorrow gathered beneath the cliff. The storm, she understood then, had not been made only of weather. It had been thickened by longing. She took up the brass lantern and stepped out into the rain. Thomas followed without needing to be asked. The wind struck like thrown salt. The grass lay nearly flat. The lighthouse beam swept over spray and darkness in long golden arcs. Far beyond, the ship leaned dangerously toward the western rocks. Narina lifted her lantern. Then, in the old language of the deep, she spoke, not commanding, asking, calling not to pride, but to mercy. The current shifted. The pool near the reef loosened. A narrow safe line opened where a moment before there had been only ruin. The ship found it, slowly, terribly slowly, but it found it. By dawn, the vessel had made the quieter bay beyond the mainland harbour. The crew survived. The village would speak of that night for years, but the storm had not yet finished what it had come to do. The following evening, the sea lay unnaturally calm. No birds called, no wind stirred. The water below the western cliff looked dark and smooth as polished stone. Narina lit the great lamp as always. Then she sat by the fire with Thomas nearby. One by one, the lost came. A sailor from a century gone. A bride with seafood in her hair. A child holding splintered wood. An old captain still whispering a prayer he had not finished in life. Then dozens more. The storm had loosened all who had wandered too long in that channel. This was the work toward which all the smaller mercies had been moving. This was why the island had waited. Narina rose with the lantern. The spirits followed in a long quiet line beneath the turning beam of the lighthouse. At the western edge of the island, she lifted the warm light and spoke. "You are not forgotten," she said. "You are not held forever by what took you. Go where waiting ends. Go where fear loosens. Go where the light no longer needs turning because it is everywhere." Then, one by one, they descended into a brightness hidden from ordinary sight. The sailor, the child, the bride, the nameless, the ancient, the newly lost. Each became lighter as they went. Each left behind some burden the sea had carried too long. At last, only one figure remained. He stood apart from the others, tall, still, powerful and silent. Narina knew him at once. "Father," she said. Whether it was truly the Sea King in form, or only his presence shaped for one brief nearness, she could not have said. The sea behind him did not move. "You chose well," he told her. Narina's eyes shone in the firelight and mist. "I chose grief," she answered. No, he said. You chose compassion, and the two are often mistaken by those who have lived inside neither. She looked at him with the tenderness that comes after old arguments have become understanding. Will you ask me home? She asked softly. The Sea King looked over the lighthouse, the fire, the quiet sea, the mortal man who had remained through storm and wonder alike. Then he answered, You have made one here. After that night, the channel changed. Not dramatically. No trumpet of miracle sounded. No sky split open. But the water rested easier. Storms still came, but they passed more cleanly. The old sailors said the current no longer felt burdened. Younger men laughed and called them sentimental. But they sailed the channel more safely all the same. Years folded on. Their love deepened. Thomas repaired the path where rain wore it thin. He carried oil to the tower. He planted coarse grasses to hold the cliff edge. He left warm broth by the fire on nights when Nerina had guided some especially sorrowful soul, and seemed quieter than usual. No vows were spoken. No audience witnessed anything grand. That was never their way. The truest love in this world often lives in the little acts no singer bothers to praise. At last, Thomas grew old. This he accepted with practical calm. Nerina accepted it only with the sorrowful grace of one who has long understood mortality, and still cannot bear it in the beloved. One winter night, in his small house by the quay, Thomas lay beneath wool blankets while the lighthouse beam moved distantly over the sea. Nerina came before anyone sent for her. When he saw her, he smiled as though she had arrived on an ordinary evening with oil and bread. You came, he said. Of course, she answered. For a while they spoke of small things. The old mason who built the tower. The fig tree that never truly liked the salt air. The fishing boat Thomas ruined as a boy and spent months repairing badly. They spoke not to avoid sorrow, but to honor the life that had carried them to that room. At last, Thomas grew quiet. The room held that unmistakable hush that comes when time loosens its hand. He looked at Nerina. Will it be frightening? He asked. No, she said. Will it be lonely? No. He was silent a little longer. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Will I know the way? Nerina took his hand. Yes, Thomas, she said. I will be carrying the lantern. His breath eased. The lines of effort faded from his face. And when the final moment came, it came gently. Like something set down, not taken. Nerina remained beside him in stillness. Then with that deeper sight she had used beside the cliffs for so many years, she saw him standing near the door, whole, unburdened, looking almost amused at death after so much worry had proved so quiet. So this is how it begins, he said softly. Nerina rose. She lifted the brass lantern. Come, she said. Together they crossed the sleeping village. Together they crossed the moonlit water. Together they climbed the island path while the lighthouse turned patiently above them. At the western edge, she raised the lantern. The hidden brightness opened below. Thomas looked toward it without fear. Then he turned back to her. Who guides the keeper? He asked. Nerina could not answer at once. At last she said, Perhaps the ones she has loved. Thomas smiled. Then he touched his brow gently to hers and went onward into the light. Nerina stood there until dawn silvered the sea. The lantern burned steadily in her hands. The lighthouse turned above. The waves moved below. Only when morning began at the edge of the world did she whisper, Go gently. It is said that after Thomas passed, the lighthouse glowed more warmly than before. Not brighter, not farther, only warmer. Those who crossed beneath it at night felt less alone. Those who grieved said if its beam entered their windows like a hand laid softly upon the shoulder. New keepers from the village learned to tend the great lamp, so the labor among the living became shared. But the deeper work remained Narina's. Each evening, she still climbed the white tower. Each evening, she still polished the lens and set the beam turning over sea and cloud and cliff. Each night, she still sat by the small fire among the stones. Sometimes spirits came. Sometimes none did. Sometimes she thought she heard Thomas laugh in the wind passing the grass. Sometimes, in the deep hush beneath all waves, she felt her father's old approval moving like a current through the dark. Years became generations. Generations became stories. And stories told often in kind voices become nearly as lasting as stone. Some called her a saint. Some called her the Sea King's daughter. Some said she was a widow of the ocean itself. But the gentlest telling was the truest. That once there was a daughter of the deep who loved mortals for their courage. That she gave up immortal halls to keep a humble light for those who wandered. That she chose not glory, but usefulness, not distance, but tenderness, not power, but watchfulness. And because she chose it, sailors found shore, the grieving found sleep, the lost found passage. And one good mortal man was loved so faithfully that even death became only another crossing beneath a familiar lamp. So if ever the night feels wider than you wished it to be, and the world beyond your window seems deeper than your heart can easily trust, think of the little fire among the stones. Oh, think of the white tower above the dark sea. Think of the warm lantern lifted in patient hands. Think of the turning beam that does not hurry and does not tire. And let yourself believe, for this evening at least, that somewhere beyond fear there is still a shore. That somewhere, even now, a lamp is being tended with care. That somewhere, the way home is being kept. These are the stories that tuck you in. If you like the story, like this video and subscribe us for more cozy nights.